Well, hello. Thank you for joining me this week on Christian Media Review. My name is William Hemsworth. I thank you so much for joining me. Well, in this week's episode, we're going to review an excellent book called The Advancement, Keeping the Faith in an Evolutionary Age by Dr. l-russbush. This was written in 2003, so it's a little bit older book, but, last week I did review C.S. Lewis, but even though this book was written in 2003, it's actually very timely because it combats some of the things that we hear about regarding, evolution, Christianity. I think it's a good resource out there. So I just want to give my review of the book itself. So Dr. Bush is actually, he's authored many books, and he served as senior professor of philosophy and dean of students at Southwest Baptist Theological Seminary. Now, this book that we're looking at is called The Advancement, Keeping the Faith in an Evolutionary Age. What it attempts to do is it challenges the Christians to defend against a worldview that is no longer theistic in nature. Guys, we're kind of living in a post-Christian world. People believing in God, a lot of people just don't anymore. And unfortunately, that trend is rising. And so this book kind of it's challenging us as Christians to defend God. And so Dr. Bush states in the preface of the book, quote, "Many Americans and Europeans and others have simply adopted naturalistic philosophy in the place of a theistic worldview, and the consequences are showing up everywhere." Really, all we can do is simply look around and see that the author is correct in this assessment. Every fabric of our society has a me attitude. The advancement goes to great lengths to establish that there is still room for a theistic worldview, and that all is not lost to modernism or even postmodernism. So Dr. Bush lays out a framework in a philosophical manner that establishes the need for God and ways that we see Him in our society today. See, the challenge to divine authority is growing, and among Christians, the spirit of renewal is also growing. Christians are no longer the majority in society, and to be honest, society is trying to push us out. And we just look at the news, you can see that. We have to stand up and defend our faith. And the advancement, it lays a good groundwork in doing that. And so what I want to do next, I just want to give a summary of the book. So Dr. Bush opens his book with explaining just what the term advancement means. He states, "The 21st century begs for a descriptive name. Modern seems strangely old-fashioned, and postmodern is surely a temporary name. Perhaps the era through which we are passing could be dubbed the advancement." Modernism is still hanging around, though it's less common. Now, with all our technical advances, we all seem to be in a hurry. We're all rushed. Traditions such as eating dinner as a family are they're an afterthought now. After all our work is done, after I do this Facebook post, etc. And with all the technology out there, we're flooded with naturalistic thought. Dr. Bush develops his book using concepts from philosophy that have been used by the great philosophers of the past to make the case for a theistic worldview. So the book itself is fairly short. It's broken down into 8 fairly short chapters. In chapter 2, Dr. Bush goes over the rise of advancement science. Part of this advancement was the development of uniformitarian and evolutionary thought. These thoughts would eventually give way to the disappearance of humanness. Dr. Bush states it denied the existence of an original divine image and a subsequent fall into sin. When God no longer exists, truth becomes relative, and he describes this in chapter 3. Dr. Bush explains that the advancement worldview is not logical because there's no moral standard. That moral standard comes from the Creator and the Scriptures which teach about him. Dr. Bush goes into the failings of the naturalistic evolution and how science has attempted to distort that reality. In Chapter 4, Dr. Bush provides alternative methods for the modern theist, or those who believe in God in the modern era. And he gives a lot of thought to the process, what's known as process theology and open theism. Both of these ideas seek to answer theological questions that have arisen because of modernism. Now, in the case of open theism, it seeks to answer the problem of evil. However, it fails to understand that God knows all that will happen, and states that God does not know for sure what will happen in the future. In the middle of this chapter, Chapter 4, Dr. Bush states, quote, "Such a scenario does not demonstrate progress and advancement. It might well be a sign of spiritual warfare." Dr. Bush goes into great lengths in explaining the fallacies of following these modern theistic alternatives that are found in Chapter 4. He describes the 7 assumptions from evolutionary biology and answers it with 10 axioms for modern scientific thought. These axioms are made up of physics and philosophy and go into great detail in proving that natural evolution is false. He writes, as a worldview, however, naturalism speaks to issues beyond those of biological science. And he closes Chapter 5 by he gives a closer dissection of evolution. And he gives 5 objections to it. He's careful to point out that disproving naturalism false is not enough to prove that God exists, although it can be a start. So this book covers a lot of material in a short time. And the book's only 105 pages. You could read it over a weekend, or even a day in some cases. And it's only 8 chapters long. So as you can imagine, those 105 pages spread over 8 chapters, they're fairly short. Though the book is short, there's a lot of great content in it. One of the most awakening arguments in the book, in my mind, is the disappearance of humanness. The rise of naturalistic evolution gave rise to humanity losing its status of being made in the image of God. Dr. Bush states this attack was not simply on the ideas about the physical location of the earth and space. It's a direct attack on mankind's special created nature. As most of us know, evolution was a theory that was proposed in the 19th century, and our advanced society is now feeling the effects of it. Along the way, some people in the church tried to justify it by saying that the soul was created and the body was part of evolution. Bush sticks to his beliefs and eloquently defends the biblical account that man was created in God's image. Now, personally, I was hoping for a lot more detail in this section because I think it's a real problem in today's culture. Now, the necessities of the argument are given, but I would have liked some footnotes in the work for further study. This book doesn't have any footnotes in it. Now, though this is partially, it's aided a lot by the endnotes that are at the back of the book, but you have to search for them. Now, Chapter 4 dealt with modern theistic alternatives, and the portion on open theism in this chapter, I think, was particularly good. Now, Dr. Bush states another theistic alternative that seeks to preserve freedom within the modern mind, within the modern mindset, is known as open theism. That's kind of what I just talked about. This theory is in conflict with the traditional view that God knows the future. It states that God is unable to infallibly know the future. Now, if God does not know the future, guys, then he's not God. That is because God is unable to have limitations, and if that is the case, in some ways he wouldn't be any different from us. Now, I'm in agreement with his thesis on this topic, but some questions come to mind when I read this text. If God's mind is made up in regard to the future, can it be changed at all? What about the role of prayer? In this regard, he seems to embrace kind of a Calvinistic view of predestination. In Chapter 5, Dr. Bush discusses 7 assumptions of evolution. He discusses them from a scientific point of view, and he dissects them using the same method. Now later in this chapter, he introduces the 10 axioms of modern scientific thought that I had previously mentioned. And he serves to dismantle those theories of evolution using philosophy. Now, for those that like a good argument, this is kind of a 1-2 punch that to me is worth the price of the book. The defense of the theistic worldview circles around to stating how precious man is because of his origin. Now, in this chapter, I think Dr. Bush makes the theistic case most strongly than other chapters. And again, that's chapter 5. So my overall evaluation of this book is that if you're a serious Bible student, if you're an apologist, if you're someone that teaches the faith, whether you may not agree with all his assumptions or not, I think it's worthy to have it on your bookshelf because it does lay out some great arguments, especially for those that will not see Scripture as something authoritative because he uses a lot of philosophy. Those that don't see Scripture as authoritative normally rely on philosophy quite a bit, and this kind of gives a counterpunch to those arguments. So I think it's a worthwhile investment in helping to proclaim a theistic worldview. So thank you for joining me on this episode of the Christian Media Review. Check out Dr. Bush's book. Remember, The Advancement, Keeping the Faith in an Evolutionary Age. I think it'd be well worth your time, especially if you're one who seeks to defend the theistic worldview. Thank you for joining me. We'll catch you next week. God bless you.